It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, the show where we talk of the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial complex. How you doing this holiday season, Steve?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm in the Hogsty's Nashville offices today. It's not a new office. It was the second office we opened, I think, actually, after many other offices around the country. So, Merry Christmas to everybody. And is Hanukkah over? Happy Hanukkah if it isn't over yet. I'm not Jewish. But if that's still going on and you celebrate that, happy Hanukkah. But yeah, doing well. How about you?
Doing pretty good. Good as can be expected. Another day alive, Steve.
What's that?
Another day alive.
That's a good thing. Are you up in the middle of the woods, or are you?
No, I'm in the city. I'm in my little glass box renta office, which actually doubles now as a pretty good little podcasting studio, and I don't have to annoy my family.
Now, are you guys up in New York having to mask up everywhere and pretend that the world is ending because of the mayor, or is it sort of normal up there?
Well, it's New York City, so it's all of the above.
That's true.
But they were we don't. My current apartment is not that far from his private residence, so it's been some activity on that block for sure.
Flip him the bird for me if you don't mind.
I have my own birds for De Blasio, but I have a feeling they're not the same birds.
Yeah, probably not. It's probably the opposite end of the complaints. The complaint spectrum would be my guess.
Yes, I'm not a big De Blasio guy, so I'm not going to defend him.
I'm not in favor of 6'7" dumb communists.
I'll agree with the dumb part. Actually, if he was a smart communist, maybe I'd be okay.
You'd be okay. That would be all right.
Yeah, that'd
right?
be fine.
It's just, let's agree on the dumb and move on. How about that?
All right. So, speaking of dumb, we have some updates in the Daniel Snyder saga. Let's call it here. It's like it's a slow burning tragedy in many parts that will leave no one satisfied in the end. But where are we right now?
Well, first of all, somebody needs to make this into like a TV miniseries on like some weird random network and the back end of cable television. The reason why we're talking about this again, other than like hashtag content, is that the Washington Post just came out with a really, really long story last week for you guys, that didn't have a whole lot of expressly new allegations, other than one really funny one, which we'll get to. But what was new was a more focused allegation that the Post was making, that Dan Snyder was actively attempting to inhibit the investigation of Beth Wilkinson. So to back up, for those of you who've been living under a rock, in as simple a form as I can make this, in chronological order, back in 2009, a woman who was an employee of the Washington Redskins franchise alleged that Dan Snyder had made some sort of sexual misconduct on an airplane returning home from the Academy of Country Music Awards in, I think it was Las Vegas. And Snyder and the team settled it, paid $1.6 million, entered into a confidentiality agreement, and that was that. And nobody knew about it at the time. It's only become to light since then. So then the Washington Post, 2 years ago, I think now, wrote another piece that said all these things that happened inside Redskins Park, women had been treated poorly. They had suffered, sexual harassment. There were allegations that the team had made illicit videos of cheerleaders changing swimsuits at a swimsuit calendar photo shoot, and that Dan Snyder was the one who requested it. He denied all of this. And then obviously Beth Wilkinson was hired originally by Snyder to investigate Snyder, and the NFL realized the folly of that and decided to hire Wilkinson on her own on their terms. So then Wilkinson is then investigating the Washington franchise and Snyder for all of these various sexual misconduct related allegations. So fast forward to the end. She finishes her investigation. The NFL says we don't want you to give a written report of any sort. Roger Goodell gives her 30 minutes while he's eating lunch, and she presents a bunch of whatever she says, and then Goodell announces to the world that yeah, some bad things had happened, but everything will be all right. We're going to fine Washington $10 million. Tanya Snyder's going to be the face of the team for a while, and then we're sending Dan Snyder to go sit in the corner without supper. And that was all we saw. Now, so what the Post is now saying is that behind the scenes, in spite of the fact that Snyder is publicly saying we want to cooperate, etc., that he was actually doing everything he could to inhibit this investigation by having a bunch of investigators show up at people's houses. That was sort of an implicitly intimidating tactic. And then a bunch of lawsuits were filed behind the scenes that we didn't even know about. His former general counsel, a guy named Donovan, filed a lawsuit ostensibly on his own, alleging that his reputation was going to be besmirched by Wilkinson's report. And it went back and forth. And then there was the Meow lawsuit, which we've talked about on this show a couple times, and that the Post alleges, which I think we've alleged also, that Snyder was merely using the Meow lawsuit as a fishing expedition to dig up a bunch of dirt on the people involved in the sexual harassment lawsuit. So here we are. And then Bruce Allen was involved in this. And the funny part is that Snyder, because he's petty and arrogant and ridiculous, got offended that Bruce Allen did not send him a congratulatory text for hiring Ron Rivera. And believe it or not, that actually made it into a settlement negotiation and the claim between Bruce Allen and Dan Snyder for Bruce Allen's payout of his contract. And a term of the settlement was actually that Allen would send Snyder a text that said, "Congrats on hiring Ron Rivera," which is maybe the most petty thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic about it. So that's sort of the status of this. I could talk forever, and we will, but I'll shut up. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, one, the 8 months delayed text is, as Steve just said, part of the settlement, but it has not been settled. Apparently, that text has not been sent.
That's the funny part. Yeah.
So that giant legal issue still looms large. Well, to quote the great philosopher Ron Rivera, this story seems interesting but not important. So, and sure, there is some little bits of news, and I understand why the Post published it. I mean, the Post views this as a long-term investigation. They've had multiple articles. Anytime something is even remotely newsworthy, which is this, they're going to publish a story. They're working on this all the time. The individual stories are just chapters in a longer series for them. So you really need to understand this as a chapter, not the whole book. But the interesting, not important part is, I think for many of us, it just confirms what we had a hard assumption was taking place already, right? No one actually believed that Snyder and his legal minions, and maybe some slightly less than legal minions, apparently maybe every once in a while, were doing everything in their power to cloudy up the waters, right? And probably tiptoeing up right against legal lines and playing it coy, etc. So to me, this just confirmed what I assumed was going on the whole time. Now, it's nice to see some evidence of it and see that was in fact correct. And I think over time, it builds a case against Snyder. And what I think what might be trending important, if you want to look what flips from interesting to important over time, is that we still seem to be circling the drain about what happened on that plane. Because we know, I mean, in my mind it probably should have, but the whole culture piece, right? The calendars, the cheerleaders, the decades of abuse, that's well documented. No one's arguing that. That's not a he said, she said generally. But the punishment for that's been doled out. It's not gonna stick. But all attention is on this Vegas flight back from the country music yahoos or whatever it was that they were at. That was a Dick Clark production, by the way. That's why Snyder was there.
Which Snyder owns Dick Clark, and then predictably ran that into the ground.
Right. So rest in peace, Dick Clark. So that to me is the interesting part moving forward, is how much attention is there and how much is sort of like, that's the last piece that we can figure out. And it's still drip on Bruce Allen to a degree, because that Gruden email connection and all that still looms out here. So Bruce Allen, he's just never that far off stage, is he?
No, he's not. In terms of, I want to start with the 2009 airplane allegation, because the attorney in me is coming out a little bit on this one. So there was an allegation, unidentified woman. Now, presumably it was more than just Snyder and her on the airplane. But point is, there was a settlement. Now, you cannot read, you being the public out there listening, cannot read anything into a settlement. I have settled cases in which my defendant client has strongly disagreed with the allegations against it. But an insurance company says, we don't care, we're settling it anyway. And then the terms of the settlement agreement expressly state in all cases, this is not an admission of liability. This is merely a settlement to resolve the legal dispute so everybody can move on. And then the other part of it is, which is a major part of the Post story, is that and the Post didn't do a good job at all. This is where I think the Post is more biased than maybe you want to admit, and it goes back a long way. I mean, they've been fighting with the Snyder and the Redskins for 20 years. But so every settlement agreement for a lawsuit like this has a confidentiality agreement, and that confidentiality agreement basically, in so many words, says if you take this money, you cannot talk to anybody at all without the consent of the defendant, except for law enforcement or a court. If you get subpoenaed in a court, you have to talk, but then you have to tell us. So Beth Wilkinson is not law enforcement, and it was not a lawsuit. This is just a private investigation. So really and truly, this woman was barred in the first place from talking to Wilkinson. Now, she could choose to talk anyway and accept the consequences of it, which the consequences would be a lawsuit in which Snyder claws back the money, and there's probably some sort of liquidated damages clause in it. But I think the Post did not do a good job of explaining this in the first place. She's barred from talking, and Snyder has to let her talk. And, the team released a bunch of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, from former employees. That's not the same thing as the settlement agreement from the sexual misconduct lawsuit. So just everybody understand that. The Post article was biased in that regard and did not explain that well. So that's number one. And then number two is, we're not ever going to find out what happened on this airplane. Whoever was going to talk has already talked. Whatever happened most likely happened away from prying eyes. If anything happened, it happened just between Snyder and this woman, and so it's a he said, she said. If there was physical evidence, somebody would have, I suspect somebody would have known about it by now. So I don't think personally we're ever going to find out what happened on the airplane. And in terms of Bruce Allen, he's just like creeping death and will never go away here. Clearly Snyder thinks that he's involved in everything. Who knows the truth? I mean, Lord knows Allen's a slime ball, so I don't think we'll ever really know that either. I personally, Chris, I think this is much ado about nothing in terms of the impact on the team. Roger Goodell has already come out and said Snyder did not, after the Post story came out and said Snyder didn't impede our investigation, and this isn't going to matter at all. So yeah, I think I can't remember the words you said, but this is, it's more of a drip than a massive revelation.
Yeah, no, I think that's clear. Will Hobson, one of the writers, one of the journalists working on this piece for over pushing 2 years probably, considering when they probably started investigating aspects of this. I think he admitted on an interview, I think it was on the Kevin Sheehan radio show, that, the fact that Wilkinson eventually got to interview the subject kind of, so that no barrier was erected, right? There might have been attempts, right? Like, people driving up and down her block and stuff like that. I don't doubt, like I said, I would imagine they did everything that they could up to a certain line to drive this a certain way. But in the end, she talked. And that also means in the end that the league knows whatever she told Wilkinson. So, and they made some kind of listen, I'm not asking you to put your faith in them, but listen, they'd love enough rope to hang him on. Let's not kid ourselves. They're in a complicated mess, and we've talked about all the reasons why they're hesitant to sort of pull the trigger here. But if they had a smoking gun, they'd take it. They don't want him as part of the club, which means whatever in the re-interview that Wilkinson did of this subject, there wasn't enough. And it's always been described as harassment, right? Which is not like, I know these are sort of legal criminal nuances, but so harassment could have been, I was the only woman on a private plane having to listen to about blowjob jokes for 3 hours on the plane ride back, versus like caught in the bathroom and something more along the lines of assault.
Yeah, let me stop you right there. So like criminal sexual assault would mean that he touched her inappropriately. That's what criminal sexual assault is. And then like criminal sexual misconduct would mean he unzipped his fly, something like that. So just a sexual harassment lawsuit, I believe that's the words I use. So sexual harassment. That could mean, like Chris said, that he's telling inappropriate jokes. It could mean he made an inappropriate comment. Gee, you're hot. Something like that. Why don't you and I go have a cup of coffee and, come up to my room or whatever. I mean, it could be something like that, or it could be absolutely nothing. That you got to remember this. It could be nothing, because I think it is telling that Wilkinson, through whatever legal means, eventually talked to this woman, and absolutely nothing became of it at all. I mean, it could be a he said, she said. The woman claims that Snyder said something, and Snyder says he doesn't, and that's the end of it, and there's no evidence one way or the other. So I just think we've seen the worst of it. And again, she's barred from filing any future claims. She's probably barred from filing a criminal complaint. Nothing's going to come of it. And notice the Post article said they released a report on Ray Rice. They released a report on Deflategate. They released findings on Jerry Richardson. Well, Ray Rice was a video about a player. They don't care about that. They'll hang the player in a second. Deflategate, that is about competitive, that is about competitive advantage, and about, at the end of it all, whether Tom Brady wanted deflated footballs, etc. Jerry Richardson is an owner. Notice it was only in executive findings. It was only after they concluded that Richardson, there was evidence to conclude that Richardson made racial slurs, and that I forget what he exactly did. It was some sort of, again, like sexual misconduct type thing. So my guess is that if they had enough on Snyder to conclude that they had that, there would have been findings and Snyder would have been out. But they don't have it, so, this is it.
Goodall and his cabal, they know whatever she told Wilkinson. So, and made their own internal calculus. You can not believe their moral compass. You can be cynical as you want, and which is all probably appropriate.
These guys don't love Snyder,
right? That's all appropriate to think that, but you also understand this, the cold hard calculus on their side. They did not, it's just like your average Washington football team fan, isn't it wishing they had enough to sink him? Like the NFL and the owners are probably not that dissimilar. They wish there was enough. They're crossing all their fingers and toes. They'd love more shoes to drop, but as of right now, at least for whatever they need, they don't have.
Yeah, I think, if the submarine could have been sunk, the torpedo would have already been launched, And this Post story doesn't really change anything. I mean, the only real news out of the Post story ultimately is the petty Dan Snyder send the text thing, which is just hilarious. And then the Post perspective that Snyder tried to inhibit Wilkinson's investigation. And if you're surprised by that, I mean, where have you been? For God's sakes. I mean, nobody should be surprised at
Yeah.
that Snyder would publicly say, "Oh, we're supporting it," and then send out some Tony Soprano goon squads to people's houses to drive by their houses or whatever. As you said, who knows? But nobody should be surprised at this. But don't expect anything. Nothing will come of this. I promise you, nothing.
Yeah, no, and by the way, just so everyone knows, the Washington Post knows that too. They didn't. This was another article in a series of a long-term investigation. That no, Liz Clark and Will Hobson, they weren't sitting around going when they hit when they turned this article in for publishing, and they did not think this is the one. They didn't. They just know that they're publishing regular articles when they have new and interesting information.
Yeah, but yes. But again, remember that the Post has been fighting with Washington
Yes.
franchise forever. And so I'm not saying that the Post is petty enough to want to run a hit piece on Snyder. I don't personally, I mean, the Post doesn't subscribe to my worldview. But beyond that, they're not going to get sued. They don't want to get sued. So they're not going to print outright libelous stuff. They're not. They're too smart for that. And so while they probably have a perspective, and they probably the people who run the Post are probably happy to smear Dan Snyder a little bit, they're not going to print anything that's overly salacious without having evidence of it. But yeah, I think Chris really made a good point, which is, while we may read this as a bombshell because we only see one article every year or whatever it is, and it's super long and it reads really bad, the Post is investigating this all the time. And there's a group of however many people, writers involved in this, that are doing this probably on not a full-time basis, but on a every day they're doing this. And so it's just, to them, it's a drip, and it is, in fact, part of a larger piece. And there'll be another piece at some point about this eventually.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's still lots of, and that's where I think the Post at least makes a good point in terms of at minimum the optics in terms of what the NFL has done in the past, and you can parse the details and the nuances of why the Ray Rice thing is different than this and so on and so forth, but the part of that only matters about 20%. What the rest of that matters is perception. And matters what kind of choices people view the NFL making, and there is still a giant area of unknowns and risk. Especially when you tie in this email cache and what happened to Gruden, and then that lawsuit. So this is still this is still a simmering stew for all involved. Also, just like this article isn't a bombshell, it's also not a closed book.
No. And yeah, and don't forget, Chris mentioned it, but what we said on this show was alleged in the article, which is, it sure is convenient that the only emails that were released were smearing John Gruden. None of it made Dan Snyder look bad, and it made Bruce Allen, who Dan Snyder hates now, look bad. The Post expressly said that some people in the NFL offices have wondered whether Dan Snyder was behind the release of the emails, which is entirely possible from a technical perspective. And again, I mean, there'll be more of this. I think didn't we have a bet about what would come out first a few shows ago from the emails? I think so. But point is, we haven't seen the last of that either. And I just like to, it's probably time to wrap up, but I just want to reiterate here, if the NFL had enough on Snyder, it would already be out. They would have released a Jerry Richardson style execution order, if you will, with the original report. Because they don't have it, they didn't, and they basically told Dan Snyder to go, to his room without supper, and that was it. If they had more, it would have already been done. It's not going to come out now, absent something else new.
Yeah, and in fact, they helped him stick a knife in the back of his minority owners. They loaned him money, and they raised his debt limit so that he could refinance the team, being the sole owner. So, if you're looking,
well, they didn't lend him money, but that part isn't right. But yeah, he borrowed. See, the NFL has debt limits. Okay, I don't know what the number is, but they have a certain limit beyond which owners cannot be leveraged, and the reason is they don't want like Capital One to foreclose on a team. That's why. And so, yes, so they did, as Chris said, they did all those things. They waived the debt limit. They allowed Snyder to consolidate power and become more powerful in his organization. So they actually supported him.
Yeah, if you're looking at cold hard facts, those are stark. Well, let's look at the league. The league looks like in a little bit of a well, the NFL, it's got its own manifest destiny, which it's been, hasn't been super successful at, right? It hasn't quite been able to get across the Mississippi River on international dominance for its sport. But they apparently are, someone's issuing out, land leases for international markets, Steve.
Kind of land leases. Yeah, it's not far from the truth. So the NFL released this international marketing plan basically this past week. And what it's doing is giving, I think, this 18 different teams express rights to market themselves in these internationally. Okay, so every team is assigned a country. Now the NFL, I don't want to delve into the politics of it here, but I'll mention it. Raised the ire of the mainstream media, or at least the notice, is that the NFL published a map. The Rams have been assigned China. The country of China on the map was red, and then they put the island of Taiwan as red also. And so that's politics beyond the scope of the story, but I wanted to mention that. I have thoughts, but it's not appropriate here. So here's the marketing plan. And by the way, no Washington the worst attendance in football with an owner who has sexual harassment allegations and then be held out as a bastion of NFL, prominence. So let's start with Mexico. So a bunch of teams have been assigned Mexico. The Cardinals, Cowboys, Broncos, Texans, Kansas City Chiefs, Raiders, Rams, Steelers, and 49ers. They have been assigned Mexico. Brazil is the Dolphins. The UK, Chicago Bears, Jacksonville Jaguars, Miami Dolphins, Minnesota Vikings, New York Jets, 49ers. Australia is the Rams. China is the Rams. The Rams seem to be the NFL's favorite marketing device. They've had more areas assigned than any other team. Spain, Chicago Bears, Miami Dolphins. Germany, Panthers, Chiefs, Patriots, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that's, again, all those teams have been assigned the right to market themselves in that country. The Rams have all of China to themselves somehow. And then, 8, 9 teams, 10 teams have Mexico? I don't totally understand how that is. It seems like the balance is a bit mixed up, but I don't know. But the point here is that this is the NFL's latest foray into attempting to grow this into an international game, so someday they can have the NFL International Conference, basically. That's what they want. That's what all this is aiming for.
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah, and so if you can open up markets for your merchandise sales as a loss leader or Vance team a little bit, and then you build a market, then you build an audience, and then you build demand for a team, and then that starts to take hold. So smart, they want teams to start having roots so that okay, we all like the Rams. It wouldn't be this great if we had our own team. That's the progression that they want in those markets. And I don't know why they have so many teams in Mexico, which I think is a very right. I mean, if you
it's a right market.
They like football in Mexico, but they like the Cowboys, and the Raiders. Like, so those other 6 teams, because I think they were both on the list. Those 6 teams, the other 6 teams, you might as well throw them back at the league office, because I know enough about football south of the border that it is all Raiders and all Cowboys country.
Yeah, so they've got the Steelers, the 49ers, the Broncos. I understand sort of the Texans, because there's many people of Mexican descent in Houston. Obviously, it's South Texas. I can sort of understand the Cardinals a little bit. I don't get the Steelers and the 49ers in any, or the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't understand that at all. I don't get what they're thinking.
Yeah, no, that seems more league office politics than anything else. Like,
Yes.
they got, the Hunts have to get something, right? So I think that's as much about keeping some kind of peace amongst owners than any kind of anything else.
Yeah, because the Chiefs got Germany. They're sharing Germany with the Panthers, the Patriots, and the Buccaneers. So, yeah, maybe Clark Hunt and company said, hey, we need more. And so, sure, you can go to Mexico, too. But I agree. I mean, it's the Cowboys, first and foremost there all the time. And I do think the Texans may have a shot just because, again, there's so many Mexican people of Mexican descent in Houston. So, but beyond that, I think all the rest of these teams are wasting their time, in Mexico for sure.
It
But
is.
larger point though, is this going to work?
Well, it's low in my opinion. It's low risk by the league because, like I said, if nothing else, you just sell more merchandise because there is pop cultural cachet around the NFL. Like, so if you export parts of that, at worst you're just another places for expanding your brand reach. So I don't know, like I don't know where the risk is if that doesn't work. I guess the overall plan is risky, and I think I have, remains to be seen whether it will work. But this particular move doesn't really. There would be no fallout if those markets fizzle or those certain franchises fizzle in those markets.
The other thing that interested me, the politics of China aside, because again, it's another show, and that's not where I'm going with this. Why do only the Rams have the largest market in the world when they assigned 9 teams to Mexico, yet one team has all of China? I mean, did anybody wonder that? It's very odd.
They must have, because they don't ever just, use the dartboard to make these decisions at a place like the
I'm not
NFL.
saying that. I just
No,
think
so
it's
what
a
I'm saying is,
weird.
I think probably, somewhat educated guess is there's probably some market research that just is like potential of fans in a place like China, even though it's giant and has a gazillion people. There probably just is not like the work you've got to do to have even like we can debate whether Germany, Mexico, and Canada would be interesting spots for an NFL team and have some legitimate conversation. But like China, like in places like that, you're starting at such a small chance that only you wouldn't want fractured brands, right? You'd want two brands, the NFL and one team, because you're not going to get that much penetration to begin with.
Well, and there's not going to be a team in China. The politics of that, we're not going to put a team in communist China unless the government's going to change, and the government's not changing anytime soon.
No, they see
So,
what the NBA. They see the NBA, which is
well,
that they sell jerseys up the wazoo in
well,
China.
yeah, and think about who was the first inroads into China in the NBA. It was really Kobe Bryant individually. He's the one that was sort of started the parade over there. He would go over there every, rest in peace, Kobe. He went over there like every summer for years. Maybe it's an LA thing. Maybe the Chinese football market just sort of supports Los Angeles. Maybe that's it.
And
Um,
I would guess that why LA the Rams seem to have large chunks is because you're right. It's Los Angeles. It's Hollywood. It's the stadium that the NFL is most excited about having on camera right now. It presents it was built to present well on TV, quite frankly. So it is the most mature TV stage for a live football game that the NFL has. So that's I think it doesn't sort of matter the Rams. It's not like whatever. Then they have some sexy players, so that helps for right now.
they're a good team.
Yeah, and they're competitive. But I think it's as much about SoFi Stadium as anything else.
That could be because I mean we didn't mention they also have Australia all but to themselves too,
Yeah,
which is
they have the
they've got more.
Pacific.
Yeah, that's right. They do. They have the Pacific. The Pacific Rim belongs solely to the Rams, and maybe it is a stadium thing. I think the other part of it is Stan Kroenke. Stan Kroenke is far more influential than anybody might think, and because he might be beyond Paul Allen. He's the richest owner in the NFL. Paul
Yeah, we walked
Allen
through his
owned,
portfolio a couple of shows ago. Remember, we looked at all of his holdings. I mean, it
yes.
was insane.
Yeah, I mean Paul Allen is richer. He owns, he's Mr. Microsoft and all that. But Kroenke is very influential, and that SoFi Stadium thing, as you mentioned, Kroenke built that with his own money. Don't forget that, and so he will never stop reminding the NFL that he didn't take NFL's money. He didn't force the NFL to pay money. He didn't force the state of California to pay money. He basically did the bulk of that by himself, and so he's going to get his dimes out of that. And yeah, maybe part of that is he went to the NFL and said, I demand and I will get the biggest piece of the marketing pie here. That's a good point. Maybe it is, but maybe it's more than just presentation. It's that he spent billions on this stadium of his own leveraged cash, you know, and he's gonna get his way out of it. Now Germany is interesting. Germany, if you didn't know, does have football fans. NFL Europe, before it died, was there. Germany has like a small professional league there. Washington has a player, David Bada, who came from Germany. The practice squad, you guys probably don't even know about him. But point is, Germany is identified for a reason. The one I don't totally understand is Spain. I wasn't aware of any interest in Spain in the NFL. The Bears and the Dolphins have Spain. Maybe they're just trying to make inroads into what they see as a vibrant market. But I wasn't aware that anybody interested in football in Spain.
It's like any other franchise type of business. You throw up seven new outlets and with the goal of three to stick, and that you'll just close up the other four when it's clear that it's not one of the winners. So, that's what I was sort of saying. I don't think it's much risk, nor do they, necessarily see that much potential, but they're going to be in those places. They're still wealthy centers of, commerce, et cetera, et cetera. So there's still, take football out of it, and there's still reasons to be in places like Spain. So they're gonna try. It's definitely super interesting. This isn't the case anymore, but there was, I think, a stretch of like 5 years where I was in London for work when one of the NFL games would be being played. Once, in fact, I was in there. I was working, so I was never able to go or whatever. But the famous Washington football team, Cincinnati Bengals tie.
You were there for that?
I wasn't at the game, but I was in London. And it is, it's given me, while I probably agree more with Steve in terms of I think this is probably a sucker's bet for the NFL long term, it did give me a somewhat interesting perspective just to say, so it was very noticeable that the NFL was in London when, one year Aaron Donald was everywhere. The Rams were in the game or whatever, and you'd see Aaron. It was just very kind of a little disconcerting to be in London and see Aaron Donald over 3 stories and stuff like that, and then
giant Aaron Donald head on the building.
Yeah, and then you that weekend, especially that day, the Sunday, jerseys everywhere. It was almost just sort of a minor holiday. Oh, it's our NFL day. So people that cared or whatever, or even if you didn't care, you'd go to the pub and have a pint, and someone would give you a 49ers jersey. So you could. It was no, and the city of London is huge, right? So anything that you see with your kind of five senses is significant. So it's given me I've seen how a city sort of takes it in London. It's interesting. I still don't think it'll work.
Well, see, that's where I want to go with this. It's one thing to have a football NFL holiday day, basically, which is what you're describing. If it's there all the time, are people really going to be all that interested in it? And I don't think they are. I kind of agree with you. It's a soccer country. Football does not have a history in anywhere outside the United States, really. But, in London, they're soccer fans, And so if the NFL's there all the time, is it going to get the same amount of buzz? I just find it hard to believe. I really do. I think to be honest, the NFL is the biggest sport in the United States, but I think it has the least opportunity to market itself internationally of any of the major sports. I think MLB does. I think the NBA does. Hockey could market itself because other countries play these sports. Beyond a handful of people in Germany, nobody plays football outside the United States. Our version of football. So I think the NFL's dream, because the dream, I think, with the NFL would be to have an international conference. You have Europe, and then you have Mexico maybe is another one, and then the Pacific maybe somewhere. I'm speculating, but because you couldn't have one conference with teams in London and Sydney, Australia. That wouldn't work. So, you'd have to have. I think that's their ultimate dream. If you fast forward 20 years, they'd want an international conference with divisions in Europe and a division in Mexico and somewhere else. So, I just don't think long term the sport is viable enough to make it internationally. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But we'll see. They also have enough. I mean, do they have enough? And which is the long term strategy you can start to see in London, considering that how long they've been there. Like, do they just think if they throw enough money at it, eventually do they build a market? Like. So I think that's almost their
How long have they
strategy
been
here.
doing it though?
Well,
They've been
that's
doing it forever.
yeah, but they turn but the London games. What was it? It went up to 5 or 6 this year, right? Or maybe this year was a little different because of COVID. I don't remember. But the goal, I mean, they were moving from 1 to 2, and they were getting up to
It was
five
like
or
five, I
six.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
So they've only turned up the heat. I mean, they could put teams in Mexico City, Toronto, and maybe even like a Vancouver tomorrow and not disrupt anything because
Well, of course, we're forgetting they don't even have 32 viable quarterbacks. They only have 32 of them.
oh, Steve,
You
then no
know,
one cares about that.
I know, I know they don't. I mean, I know, but it just does anybody stop to wonder what the effect and impact on the game? You're not going to find. No, you're right. Nobody cares, and I've said that before on this show. I just find it humorous. You can't even field 32 viable teams now, and now what are you're going to put in an entire international division? Who are you gonna have playing quarterback? The backup from Southeast Iowa State is going to start for the London Monarchs.
Yeah, no. And like guys that couldn't even start in the
I loved your
XFL.
contemptuous. Oh, nobody cares about that because you're totally right. I mean, absolutely.
Right, it's a parody, right? It's all parody. Well, our last story here is one that, like, this is kind of like one of those stories we talked about a ton in the past. And I think we're only going to talk about more and more. But we're starting to see different colleges, universities, different sports themselves wrestle with, and less wrestle with, and more start to take advantage of these new name, image, likeness laws. I guess it's actually, I mean, it's bubbled in the states, but now it's federal, right? And isn't this federally protected NIL
I don't believe it's federally protected.
or did
What happened is
yeah, I
that
can't remember exactly what was the
well, I do. It's so I believe the state of California kicked it off
right, and then a
and
bunch
passed a law
followed.
that said, yeah, in like 3 years this will be legal, and then a bunch of different states, like 3 or 4 states, followed, and then the NCAA
Oh,
changed the
that's right.
rules.
They changed it. I knew there was some centralized decision.
Yeah,
Right.
for those of
Yeah.
you who don't know, the NCAA is not a governmental body. It's just a private institution. It's a private body composed of, I think, probably all of the athletic playing universities in the country.
So they basically just saw the trend of the states and basically just took this what the states were putting into law and made it policy, and that meant that they'd be probably cut them off from less oversight by the
Well, 'cause
state,
they were
state
gonna
to
lose.
state. Yeah,
Ultimately, they were going to lose.
right.
If
So
you
they just
sued
pulled the plug
California,
themselves.
yeah, what's the court going to? What are they going to say to a court in California? Please don't do this. You know, I mean, the legislature. You might not like it. I don't really like it, to be honest. But the legislature has every right to pass a law like that. At the end of the day, the NCAA is subject to state law.
Yeah, and if you want to just be red state, blue state for a second, just as not let's say to debate any of that, but just what's interesting here is California makes the law, and the next group of are fairly red southeast states. Guess what? Because they're in the
Florida was
Southeast
involved.
Conference. Yeah.
Wasn't Florida one of the states that passed one?
Yeah,
So,
I think
it's
in Georgia, Alabama. So like you can see when you can see there may be multiple reasons and motivations, but when something crosses borders that fast, it's a movement.
Yeah, right. And so I think the NCAA is made up of incredibly dumb people, and it's mixed up. NCAA, we said this before. I mean, I think the NCAA needs to be abolished personally and just start over. But yeah, I think they saw the handwriting on the wall. But so here's the reason why we're doing this now is we've seen more and more stories of NIL becoming a central key part of how teams are recruiting. We've seen that. We saw the signing day was just a week ago, and this was a part of it. Like Deion Sanders convinced a 5-star recruit to come to Jackson State, and that granted maybe some of it is just Deion Sanders' cult of personality a little bit, but the other part of it is under NIL. you could make money at Jackson State if you're high enough profile. You can make money at it. The interesting part, there was a globalmatters.com story about this. You can search for it there. But what the story talked about was how the bulk of the money being made is small. It's a lot of people making a little bit of money. It's not the Trevor Lawrences of the world signing with Nike. It's that a lot of these people are making money on social media. These athletes, they're signing marketing deals, so they send out, what's the TikTok ads, because that's really a kind of a young 20-something, medium now. And so it's people making a lot of that kind of money. But in terms of marketing, I think it's fundamentally changed forever, changed the way you recruit, especially football and basketball. Because you can make, you don't have to go to Duke. You can make some money, and you can make a lot of money anywhere. If you just play well enough, you will get contracts.
Yeah, and that's why Florida, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, all these Southeast by geography and Southeast Conference by college football affiliation were right on this because they knew the leg up in the recruiting this would be. I mean, you can now. It's so fascinating because you can do a few things, right? You can build up a total pay for play legal. I mean, people will find the gray areas, but legal way to create an ecosystem of pay for your players, right? Instead of having someone's uncle is a booster, knows the Southeast Nike rep, so we're gonna fund, you can just say no. We've built. Here's a whole, here at the University of Georgia, we have branding experts, we have social media managers, we have, there's this whole ecosystem for you to walk into, and and we will hold your hand through all the way up to where we legally can. But here is the process for making money while you play at the University of Georgia. So they're building that system as we speak. Because they're like, hot damn, you basically, and I'm pro this, by the way, so it sounds like I'm negative. I'm not. I'm just showing you how the big players will do this. But what's fascinating, in Steve's point, and which we said when we talked about this when it was, kind of as a concept or going through state houses, etc., this is a long tail thing for a pretty big, diverse set of athletes. So just because it gums up what was already a cluster of bad, in terms of big time college sports and its finances, this does a lot of different things for the long tail of college athletics. And while we're obviously putting the final stake into the heart of amateurism as a concept, this actually is the most promising thing for robust college athletics that might have come down in a long time. And this Global Matters article really starts to detail out what it does for some of these athletes.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like legalizing narcotics, right? Because it's a horrible thing for amateurism, but it's also reality. Because, as Chris said, this is going on anyway. And instead of you have, Huntington Chevrolet in Columbia, South Carolina. That guy who owns it is a booster, and I'm making this up, by the way, just for in case there really is a Huntington Chevrolet somewhere. I'm making this up, but that guy could have been illegally funneling money via handshakes, filled with cash. Now all he has to do is hire the quarterback of University of South Carolina or the running back or whoever as spokesman for his car dealership, or have him come out and do meet and greets. That's happening now. Somebody I work with has a grandson who plays for a university in the state of Texas. I don't want to say, she may not want all this out, but her son has been doing NIL signings, in the local town where this university is. He's not making a ton of money, but he's making some money. And so, yeah, it's sort of legalizing, whereas you used to have to get your dope from, the MS-13 gangster on the street corner. Now it's legal, and these boosters can just hire you to do marketing. And so I think, number one, there's two things. There are now a couple clearinghouses that are doing this, and so they're basically the marketing middleman. So you can approach this clearinghouse, and they will set you up for a fee. So they'll take a percentage, and they'll set you up with these marketing deals. But yeah, I think the schools are smart to get their boosters involved in recruiting, and they can say, look, come to Alabama. Here's our boosters who will hire you to be spokesmen for their companies, you know, instead of funneling cash. So in that respect, it's sort of surrendering amateurism forever, which is a part I don't like, because at the end of the day, it's still supposed to be college athletics, and I don't really like that part of it. But it's also just reality.
That's fine.
It's over.
Yeah.
That has drowned. It got thrown overboard and drowned in the Pacific Ocean a long time ago.
Yeah. So there's and I agree. Now let's be clear, in men's college basketball, men's college football, the system is being built fast to do those things. Those clearinghouses, all those things that a booster would do, both above board and below, are now being funneled into a more overt system that the big players will take advantage of. But I also am super interested in what both intended and probably more likely unintended consequences are here, because you can imagine, I was reading on the Athletic an article about how the mid-majors are taking advantage of this in college basketball mostly. So it was called How Will NIL Help the Little Guy. Mid-major Duquesne is trying to win by being first. And the Deion Sanders is another good example. This actually potentially could actually make more schools competitive for players, and especially in the world of college basketball, where you can still have a mid-major at least think they can win the national championship, right? And some places sometimes get close. I'm curious, over the next 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 years, are we going to see more teams retain their juniors and seniors? If you're
not desperate for cash,
if you're a Duquesne and you're pulling in a couple $100,000 being the starting point guard, and you think you can go to the tournament and compete your junior and senior year, so are we going to see? It's really interesting what this will mean for competitive balance. Will, in college football, some conferences get better at this faster, and will it change the conference power balance? There's a lot of really interesting things to watch here.
Yeah, especially for those universities that are in more major metropolitan areas and aren't out in the middle of nowhere. But just to give credit where credit is due. So it's globalsportmatters.com. The article is called, that we saw, there's lots of articles in this, but the one we were talking about, it's called How College Athletes Are Making Massive Decisions in the NIL Era, by Alex Kirshner, dated Tuesday, December 7th. So that was the Global Sport Matters article. But I think some of this is, I think geography will matter, in this. If you can play for, let's use San Diego State as an example. It's in a mid-major conference. It's in the Mountain West Conference, I believe. Well, it's also in Southern California, which is, the second largest market in the country. So you could conceivably say, okay, I'm not good enough to play at USC basketball, UCLA basketball, but I can go to San Diego State and still get a whole bunch of marketing deals, and make more money than if I go out to, Southeast Missouri State in the middle of nowhere, for example. So I think we may see geography play more and more into this as time goes on. But I do think it's going to level the playing field a little bit. Again, I'll bring up the Deion Sanders thing. Deion Sanders convinced a 5-star recruit to go to an HBCU, Jackson State. Isn't it Jackson State where he is?
Yeah.
I think it's Jackson State. And yes, the fact that he's Deion Sanders absolutely played a part in it. But I would argue that part of probably what Deion said is, you can make money here at Jackson State.
Yeah, you can be, well, first of all, and for anybody who's a recruiter for HBCU, I do that. I'm working on a project in work, and so I'm in all aspects of my life, I'm stumbling over the acronym. But there's emotional pull in recruitment. That's what all those recruiters do. But now, think about Deion Sanders' sales pitch. Then you can be a big fish in a small pond, because you'd probably be our best player. So there's two, right? Those are the two that he'd already have in his pocket without NIL, and he wouldn't win. So now he says those two things. He still has them. There's still chips to play. But he now can say, we're building, you can come here and you can earn revenue basically, and you can come learn at the feet of the greatest individual sports marketing athlete the last 50 years has seen. So it's not only that, but like, like, oh, and by the way, I'm one of the best we've ever seen, and I'm not even talking about playing on the football field. So, like, yeah, that guy, that becomes, you add those four things, and that's a no-brainer for some of these guys.
It was a no-brainer for that recruit, and I can't
Yeah.
remember his name, but he was a 5-star recruit, and that's never happens. Those 5-star recruits always go to major programs, D1 power conference schools.
Yeah, I
Always.
wanted to highlight one thing from the world, what are they called, the Global Sports Matters article, because this does to me, when we talked about this when this was still a concept, I think I would often use, like, obviously football and basketball are going to be its own thing, and obviously, for someone who's, on a non-scholarship archery, team at his local liberal arts college is not going to take advantage of this. But what this does do is it creates a middle class and in college athletics. And I would often use the example of, look at a women volleyball player. Volleyball is, for what it is a very popular, very competitive. It's an Olympic sport. There's pro. It's a pretty big ecosystem, especially for women college athletics. Well, here we go. Nicklin Hames, a setter for Nebraska's 5-time national championship volleyball program, so right at top program, has struck NIL deals with clients ranging from the Lincoln-based New Mexican barbecue restaurant Muchachos to the insurance company Amaritas. She's working now on an arrangement with the First National Bank of Omaha. I'm not very good at saying no, Hames says. So, I mean, look at that. I think, ecosystem of a sport that is established enough, has a dedicated audience, and has a bunch of ways in which players potentially play after their college careers over, especially with beach volleyball and semi-pro leagues, et cetera, et cetera. You see where this is creating a middle class.
Yeah, and volleyball is a non-revenue sport. It doesn't have any television contracts that I'm aware of.
They have some regional like streaming and stuff, but yes, nothing of note.
Yeah, right. But that young lady is making a decent living at it because she's high profile enough in her ecosystem that she can capitalize on it, and she's doing it within the rules, and good for her. And so maybe I think what you're getting at here is the middle class, if you will, is going to be a lot of these non-revenue sports may get more attention than they otherwise would because some of their players and their stars are going to be out front more than they are now. I think sort of that's what you're getting at, right?
Yes, for sure. And it's just also fascinating to look at markets, right? Like everyone's assuming is you want the biggest market, you want scale, economies of scale, big,
I just
big.
said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a while ago, 10 years
But,
ago.
if there are economies of scale can trend down and still be very lucrative for everyone involved in that economy, and this is, things like this start to give that potential.
But only thing I ask about this, let's just stop calling this amateur athletics.
Oh yeah,
It's not amateur athletics anymore. If we can get past that, I'll be okay with it. Let's just not pretend this is just college athletics and all that, because this is professional sports run by universities. That's what it is. We need to stop pretending and stop the nonsense. It's not amateur athletics anymore.
100%. Amateur athletics is your kids, community soccer league or little league team up until about middle school, and then those start to be blurring the lines as well. But
Probably, yeah.
yeah, but that's really what
Well,
amateur
it's not
athletics
going
is.
to be too long before these NIL people are approaching high school kids.
Yeah, no, right, yeah, for sure. But you could also make the case that it was never amateur athletics because it was always a business model for the school.
It was just Tony Soprano doing it instead of, above board, like it is now. Now, if I were advising a kid, I'd also be a little bit leery of these marketing clearinghouses too, because I don't know what kind of I haven't seen their contracts. I don't know what kind of financial arrangements they have. Are they taking a way more of a percentage than would be necessary? It may be that if you're a high enough profile athlete, you need to go hire your own marketing person and ignore these clearinghouses because they're probably taking a huge percentage, would be my guess, or from people who have no idea what they're talking about. Like 18-year-old kids who don't know anything about business are going to approach these people and they're going to get taken. So I might advise, if my kid were doing this, let's hire our own person. That something to consider.
Oh, 100%. We will. These clearinghouses and just the system in general will produce scandals.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, these clearinghouses are not altruistic, okay? These are slime ball marketing guys and agents and stuff who are trying to make money on the backs of other people's hard work. And I'd bet amount of money that matters to me that the percentages they're taking is probably outrageous.
Yeah, for sure. And and part of the athletic article I mentioned, the sort of Duquesne plan was, how do you keep some of those services in house? How are they just students? Is it some part of student services? Not you can't do it at soup to nuts because you probably would violate some things.
Some rules.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't have like marketing advisors, right? That doesn't mean they can't start spinning up like marketing classes in their business school. Like there are things that the universities will do to build up especially the ones that think that this is and remember athletics. I have a brother-in-law who's a small college athletic director, and he says like it's not just the gate revenue, and it's not just strong athletics and across the board. That's a recruitment tool. That's a donor tool from alumni. Like the business of sports for a college is pretty deep for how the university's business model overall. So these have lots of trickle down, if you want to use that, or just lots of like financial implications that go throughout that ecosystem of how a college or university operates. So enough of them that are already invested in sports at that level are gonna do the things they need to maintain that.
Well, yeah, and I think what you do at that level is you just form more of a nexus with your donors, with your boosters rather, and I don't know how far you could go from a legal standpoint, with these guys, but you basically have an arrangement, whether written or unwritten, where these donors will agree or the boosters will agree to take on X number of, athletes per year.
Yeah.
And you have sort of as formal a system as you can get away with and not run afoul of state law, which I don't know what that.
No one does. No one does on either side of that line right now. So
yeah,
it'll be defined in the next couple of years.
yeah, that's true. There'll be more lawsuits.
Yeah. It remains to be seen. Yeah, this is gonna be a story that we talk about. We've been talking about. It's not like any new thing, but this is one of them. Like sometimes other things always capture the headlines or whatever, but like there's things that there are tectonic shifts, and to me, this is a tectonic shift.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
All right, so who knows what the sports world will look like by the time you hear this? I think you're listening to it as a way to get ready for a Tuesday football game or Wednesday football game or Thursday football game. But who knows? But Steve, maybe how are you all making sense of these next couple weeks?
Yeah. So in terms of the Hogs tie, obviously the Washington Philadelphia game got moved to Tuesday, so you are hearing this before the game, which is a little bit unusual, and that certainly makes for a difficult week, coming up for the team. And for those of us who cover it, it's another Hogs tie late night, which we hate. So, but there's that. And I know Rick Snyder and his Seasons of Discontent crew also hate that, but it is what it is. So there's that. And we have all of our regular written content and whatnot. Again, the schedule this week's going to be skewed, but we will still have everything we normally publish, only in a very condensed fashion.
And are you guys deep diving on whatever fourth string quarterback on the practice squad?
I have spent. Let me see. I normally update. I have a massive, huge spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet with all kinds of financial and player data and everything. And a condensed version of that is what we publish on the website. I usually update that thing like once a week at most. I've spent Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I spent the past 3 nights in a row doing massive updates to that to keep track of, who's on the Corona list and who's not and all of that. So yeah, it's a mess. There's no point in me updating it publicly because it's going to change in an hour.
Yeah. Well, we will see. It should be an interesting week, extended football.
Just beat Philadelphia by hook or by crook. Beat Philadelphia.
Well, if they do, even on the Tuesday, because it's not like I don't think there's I think they'll get a couple players back, but it won't be like a It won't be like
Well,
a
no, 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 no.
bunch.
Wait, no, it could because the NFL's coronavirus rules. I don't have them all 100% right, but the gist of it is, if you are unvaccinated, you're quarantined, for lack of a better term, for 10 days. If you are vaccinated, it's like a couple days, and you basically just have to test negative again and you're back. So it is entirely possible that a whole bunch of those players will be back because most of those players got put on the list Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, no,
Tuesday,
I
Wednesday, Thursday.
I realize
They
that.
might get a bunch of those players
But
back.
let's say even if they get half back, and they're not, some of them
It's
are
still a
very,
mess. They only
yeah,
have 40 on the active roster right now today on
right.
Saturday
I'm
morning.
still saying even if Jonathan Allen and maybe both the Allens walk back into the room, right? It's still going to be a Herculean effort. If they end up pulling off a victory on Tuesday, it's going to be insane.
Because they also have a bunch of injuries, real injuries,
Right? Yeah.
not fake injuries.
No COVID and no. If you had no COVID and you had those players and you still had no J.D. McKissick, I still would be pretty worried.
And Terry McLaurin's in the concussion protocol.
So
Their best player.
Should be, yeah, fair point. Should be interesting, and you won't know by the time you listen to this if you listen to this when the day comes out. So we will talk to you in 2 weeks.